Welcome to 40 Fit Radio, where we bring you science-based, common sense information regarding fitness, health, and lifestyle for the 40-plus community. I'm your host, Darren Deaton, doctor of physical therapy with 28 years clinical practice experience, starting strength coach, and certified CrossFit trainer. "40 Fit Radio, real people, real fitness, real health." All right, so welcome back to the 40 Fit Radio podcast. I'm your host, Darren Deaton, and today with me I have a very special guest. This is our our second guest in the Foundation series, which are the first 10 podcasts from the 40 Fit Radio. And I'm very excited about having this guest. I have studied some of his work. We've spent several conversations, whether it be on the interwebs, and you guys know that are older that's what I call it, the interwebs, or whether it be just through private messaging or emails or direct phone conversations. Today we have with us Dr. Loren Bertocci. Did I say that right, Loren?
Yes, you did.
And I'm going to let Loren tell you a little bit about his scientific background, but let me just tell the listeners right now, this guy is a scientist, a pure scientist. He understands the science of what we're going to talk about today, and that is supplements for masters. Supplements for masters. We're going to talk about some of the supplements that are out there, some of the things that are being sold out there that are sold as I guess you would say, the fountain of youth, or other supplements that are sold to improve performance or quality of life. And we're going to go through some of those things. Now, we're not going to dial down so deep into this that we're going to get into scientific formulas and things like that. That might bore most of our audience, Loren. You and I might enjoy.
That's what I do
enjoy
on a daily
it.
basis.
We might geek out on that stuff. But I think the key here is giving you a kind of a broader picture of some good supplements that are out there to support not only your fitness and health, but also your performance. So, Loren, tell us a little bit about your scientific background, your educational background, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so actually, I'm going to do this slightly differently, and that is that I got exposed to being a competitive athlete at a roughly age 9 as competitive swimming. And by the time I got to middle school, I started to get curious about what was actually going on in me as I was doing this. And one thing led to another, and so forth and so on. I ended up becoming a biochemist. I went to graduate school, got a PhD in physiology, although most of my coursework was biochemistry and biophysics, postdoc in advanced radiological physics, and then a publication record that really centered around things that mitochondria did in and around skeletal muscle. That's probably the bulk of my publication record.
So most people understand, what is the mitochondria? In a layman's term, what is the mitochondria?
It's the organelle, in other words, the small piece of a cell that actually makes the ATP you need to actually do exercise. So basically, my adult life has been in studying how this thing works, what it does, and how you stimulate it to do other things.
Great. That gives people an understanding of what that little organelle does. And ATP is the energy unit, the cellular unit that we need to basically, it's built off of glycogen and also fat oxidation, but it's what we need to be able to perform work, right? To make our muscles move, make our joints move, and to be able to do things.
You can think, if you're a muscle cell, you can treat ATP as a car treats gasoline. If you don't have gasoline, the car's going to stop. A muscle cell runs out of ATP, it's going to stop.
Excellent. That's great. Great info. And so the reason why I have Loren, guys, on the podcast today is because of this very background that he has. Now, also, you've been in an academic position. Tell us a little bit more about your professional background.
So after going through that schooling, I ended up on the faculty at UT Southwestern in Dallas. And Darren, you've probably been there.
Yeah, DFW.
My academic appointment was in radiology. Most of my research was done in collaboration with either cardiologists or neurologists, all of whom were taking advantage of the fact that I knew something about muscles that they didn't, and they knew stuff about neurology and cardiology that I didn't.
Sure.
And that was our effective collaboration over the years. As that evolved, it appeared as if the sweet spot of the stuff that I wanted to do had to do with skeletal muscle, and at least initially in human exercise, later on in rodent stuff. But it was basically things that related to how a muscle could function, either what caused it to function at a less than optimal level, what caused it to function normally, or what might make it function better, which was my final big research grant, which was funded by NASA.
Are you still in a leadership position on a faculty in a university right now?
Yeah, I'm on the faculty at the Marion University College of Osteopathic Medicine. I teach biochemistry, and I direct the program in exercise and sports science.
Okay, excellent. So what I'm really getting at is I think we've got a guy on the program that knows a little bit about the human body physiology and science. And I think our listeners would agree.
I hope so.
I really, when I've spoken to Loren over the, probably the 4 or 5 years that we've known each other, I've just really enjoyed the conversations. They're always stimulating. I always come out learning something new. And I think we both have an appreciation for training models and fitness and health models that are training oriented and not just, in other words, they're goal outcome oriented. We have specific stressors that we're applying, and it's a science. It's the best science that we have. And so it's for fitness training. And then I think we both have an appreciation for that. So let's talk a little bit about supplements. And I'm going to let you take it from there. I'm going to let you talk a little bit about the supplements that you think are valuable to the masters population. And obviously, a lot of these supplements would be valuable at any age, correct? I mean, they would be good for anybody.
To a certain degree. I think a case could be made that the 20-plus people could do what they do, take a multivitamin, and probably be okay. But things start to change at somewhere in the neighborhood of age 40. So let me go through probably 3 things that come immediately to mind that would make somebody imagine that some sort of dietary supplementation makes sense.
Sure.
First, modern agriculture. So you're growing corn, you're growing soybeans, you're growing whatever you're growing. Market pressures are driving the seeds you buy, and the ag science people are driving the genetic modifications of those seeds. In the end, market pressures say to any agricultural organization, grow what you want to grow, make it grow fast, make it stable in transition, and we don't much care all that much else. So I bring that up because some relatively recent publications, which I find fascinating, have compared protein and mineral composition in modern plants versus things from 400 years ago.
Sure.
And modern plants, compared to the same ones, same species, corn versus corn, soybeans versus soybeans, they have more carbohydrate, more sugar, less protein, and far fewer minerals. And the reason for that is that the pressures are to make them grow faster.
Right.
So they don't have the time to build the proteins, and they don't have the time to absorb the minerals. So I don't care how wonderful your diet is, the stuff you get at Kroger is simply not going to look in a mineral and protein way that it looked 400 or 500 years ago.
Yeah, we would call those previous food sources more like heirloom.
Yes,
sources, right?
absolutely.
They came from the original seeds, and they haven't been modified by man.
And I try to get heirloom stuff when I can, but grocery stores are limited.
Sure.
So then there's the point number 2, and that is with aging, whether we like it or not, despite the fact that I trained for 2.5 hours today, and you probably did too, our total metabolic output's going to shrink. And it's going to shrink for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the inevitable march forwards to sarcopenia and loss of muscle mass and so forth. So if you could eat enough of the current foods to get enough of the minerals and vitamins, the quantity of calories you'd absorb would be so large you'd gain weight.
Sure. That's the problem we have in the Western Hemisphere.
Absolutely.
With metabolic syndrome and higher diabetes type 2 rates than we've had ever in our history. And everything is so calorically dense because of the way we grow it and the way it's marketed and the way it tastes that now we're eating lesser and lesser food, but more and more calorie dense.
And I guess the final thing in there is that somewhere around age 50, in your proximal small intestine, you start losing the capacity to absorb a subset of big complex molecules. And many of those are the kinds of things you would actually want to be able to absorb. So the only way to outsmart that is to swamp the system with more of those things. So those are my big 3 things that come immediately to mind.
So let me break this down for my simpler mind. Number 1, our food has less good stuff and more bad stuff in it.
Absolutely.
To start with. Number 2, as we're aging, our metabolic rate is slowing down. Our ability to maintain our muscle mass is becoming more impaired. And then number 3, which those things lead to all the things we have in our society: hypercholesterol, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, the big sequelae of the big 4. And then number 3, it would be that as our gut ages, we're just not processing the food sources the way that we need to process the food sources. So we're really not getting the end nutrients out of normal food intake, stuff that we might buy at the local grocery store.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So from here, where do we go, Loren? What do we do?
Well, you asked, when we chatted earlier, you asked me to come up with a list of things that I think that master's age athletes might most need in supplementation. So I made a list of 5 that from a basic biochemical perspective and a basic physiologic perspective make sense.
Okay.
In no particular order, but this is my top 5. First is vitamin C. And everybody laughs, okay, Linus Pauling and so forth. But actually, vitamin C is pretty important biochemically. And its primary value is that it participates in an oxidation reduction cycle. And the listeners don't have to know what that is. My biochemistry students do, but the listeners don't. But
it's the aging cycle.
In the absence of that cycle working properly, you get scurvy. And everybody's heard of that.
Sure.
So I said it's part of a ascorbate glutathione cycle. Glutathione, but by the way, we can't make ascorbate, but we can eat it. So eat fruits and vegetables and you get vitamin C. You can make glutathione, which is the other part of this cycle. The problem is that glutathione as a molecule has to have selenium in it. And selenium is one of the minerals that is most depleted in soils. So in the old days, corn It's full of selenium. Fruits and vegetables were full of selenium. Well, not anymore. So vitamin C and selenium are 1 and 1A, the top of my list.
Okay.
Next, calcium and phosphorus. And those are the minerals that are in bones. This is particularly important for women, but for any aging athlete, if your bones demineralize, that barbell looks pretty heavy.
Sure.
Calcium and phosphorus need to be in your supplement. And the reason they need to be in the supplement is that your proximal small intestine doesn't absorb them very well. Next, zinc. And it's kind of like selenium in that it's depleted in soil. And it's in the middle of 4 or 5 of the most important enzymes we need in our muscle cells to make ATP.
Right.
And finally, for those of us like me who lives a largely indoor lifestyle, vitamin D.
Absolutely.
If you go outside, you're in the sun a lot, yeah, okay, fine. But my day-to-day existence is almost completely indoors. I supplement with vitamin D.
Okay, now these are mostly vitamins and minerals.
Yep.
Now, how would you recommend getting these vitamins and minerals? I mean, obviously, like we've talked about in our other podcast, and we'll talk about in the big picture concept, and that is that the first thing we always got to consider is a good quality whole foods diet with organic vegetables, free range meat, good quality lean meats, good quality nuts and seeds and fruits and vegetables. I mean, that's the start, is a good nutrition program. Then getting lots of sleep and rest, 8+ hours of sleep every night, if possible, making sure that we're staying well hydrated, and then training and resting through recovery work cycles the way that we should too. But let's say we're doing those basic things. Where would you recommend would be the best source for these vitamins and minerals? And would you stay with the normal dosages that are on the bottles, or they're prescribed based on, over the counter stuff?
It's hard for me to make a general recommendation for everybody.
Sure.
I'll start with an autobiography. What do I do, knowing what I know and training the way I train at my age? I take one of those age-specific multivitamins in the morning, that happens to be Centrum Silver, although I don't own stock in the company. But it's got all the stuff in it that it should have. I take an additional 2,000 units of vitamin D, and that's because I'm indoors all the time. Mm-hmm. And then we eventually started a company that makes a product that's got everything else in it that I need. And in fact, it's got everything else in it that any master's athlete ought to have.
All right, so I'm gonna give you free agency here. And by the way, folks, I reached out to him to ask him to speak about supplements because I know he's a scientist. I know he has a great physiology background, like we spoke about, and I also believe in his product, believe in the science behind it. So tell us a little bit about your company, and tell us a little bit about the product and what's in that product that you use for masters fitness and health and performance.
So as I was making the transition out of being a master swimmer to first CrossFit, now weightlifting, and started to realize that, I'm 60. I'm not 30 anymore. Maybe I ought to like pay attention to what's been published about this stuff. One thing led to another, and we ended up deciding, somewhat selfishly, I remember telling my wife, honey, this is what I need to take in every day if I'm going to make this work. And so one thing led to another, and we started a company. The company's called Pangea Biomedical. At the moment, it's got one product. My master plan in here is to have a company with 3 products. But at the moment, the first product has the stuff that is essentially the most urgent that I would need. It's got vitamin C in it. It's got vitamin D in it. It's got selenium in it. It's got calcium and phosphorus. It's got zinc. It also has another set of molecules that they are involved in pathways that cause your cells to make more mitochondria. And the other set of effects are more general, but they interact with metabolic pathways that otherwise would trigger cell death.
Sure.
So if you want to think about it as an anti-aging effect, that's what it is. And there are 6 major molecules that do that: resveratrol, quercetin, PQQ, pterostilbene, ubiquinol, and acetylcarnitine. And Origins has those 6 molecules in pretty high concentration, certainly much higher than you'd get if you just went down the aisles at Vitamin Shop or GNC or something.
Okay, the name of the product is?
Origins.
Okay, yep. And tell us what each of these molecules that we haven't previously discussed in the other vitamins and minerals, for example, resveratrol, what does that do?
There are 4 in here that have essentially similar sorts of effects: resveratrol, quercetin, PQQ, and pterostilbene. And I lump them together because their effects are somewhat similar. The reason we have all 4 of them is that the relative effects of each of them is a little different. So we're hitting with different potencies 4, 5, 6 different metabolic pathways. And we're trying to sort of be all things to all cells, if you will.
Sure.
There are some anti-inflammatory effects. Quercetin probably is most potent for that, although resveratrol is pretty good at that. All of them trigger the growth of new mitochondria. Resveratrol has probably the greatest so-called anti-aging effect.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the pathways that it causes to upregulate are classed as, if you will, exercise mimetics. So in other words, those pathways get triggered when you exercise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You also get triggered when you take enough resveratrol.
Right.
So you get it twice if you're doing what I do. And all of them have, at least to some degree, a cardioprotective effect. Mm-hmm. That cardioprotective effect is to lessen the likelihood of any sort of vascular cell adhesion starting to get oxidized to turn into a foam cell, which then turns into a clot, which in the wrong place could ruin your entire day.
Yeah, that's not a good day when that happens.
Ubiquinol is in there for one reason only. I'm selfish. I have a familial hypercholesteremia from my mother's side, mm-hmm. and I take statins, and ubiquinol gets depleted when you take statins. And since I'll bet you 25% of the people listening to this podcast mm-hmm. are male on statins, you need ubiquinol.
Right. I mean, we know now that number one, they lose muscle strength.
Yep.
And they lose recovery capacity.
Yep.
And so, but
it sometimes is better than the alternative.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. You don't want to stroke out, right? I mean, that's you don't want to throw a clot one day in the middle of running on the treadmill or lifting weights. And so, or just walking around the house, mowing your yard. But the CoQ10, the ubiquinol CoQ10 is designed to basically help to reduce exercise-induced muscle cell injury, right?
It does that. That's okay. Secondary. My acute interest was, since CoQ10 is a component of one of the molecules in the electron transport chain, and we know it gets depleted when you give statins, I really would like to have a perfectly useful electron transport chain. So ubiquinols in this product. And the final molecule in there is acetyl L-carnitine, which is well known to be the molecule that allows cells to use fats as a fuel. So regardless of how lean you think you are, you functionally have an unlimited amount of fat as a fuel, and you have a limited amount of glycogen.
Right.
So anything you can do to use fat where you're never going to run out of it, as opposed to glycogen where you might, is a good thing.
Right. It helps you shift that muscle fuel use from not totally carbohydrate, but helps you shift the gradient more towards the fat side, towards fatty oxidation. Okay, so we've got all these different elements, these different molecules that can help masters individuals in the Pangea Origins product. But individuals could take a lot of those molecules individually if they wanted to.
Yeah,
right?
You can go to GNC or Vitamin Shop or anything. You can find them all.
Right.
They're right there.
The beauty with your product is you've put them all together in an appropriate dosage.
Well, the bigger beauty is, there are two bigger beauties, actually. One is doing it the GNC method is more expensive.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
But there's a much more important thing, and that is that when you walk into one of these stores to buy whatever it is, you look at the label and you go, oh, well, that must be there. That must all be there because it's on the label.
Right.
Well, what if something's in there that's not on the label? Or what if something that's on the label isn't really there? How do you know that? Well, there is a way to know. I think most of the listeners here have heard of USADA, United States Anti-Doping Agency, that was started by a guy named Don Catlin at UCLA in and around the time of the LA Olympics in '84. As he's now in his closing in on retirement age, he started a company called the Banned Substance Control Group. You take whatever it is you have, send it to BSCG, and they run it through their tests. And what they spit out is a report. And the report is exactly what's in this thing, what's not in it. The label would suggest is in there. And probably most importantly to me anyway, it ensures that nothing is in there that would trigger a positive USADA test in competition.
Sure, because many of your products are taken by competitive athletes in all sorts of different athletic venues, CrossFit, Olympic weightlifting, endurance sports. I mean, you have a whole list of individuals.
I get tested every time I compete at weightlifting nationals. If I'm on the podium, I'm going to be blood tested or urine tested.
Sure.
And I don't want to get busted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And a piece of that's actually important. There's a molecule out there that is probably universally viewed as helpful, and that's creatine. I can't imagine any negative to consuming creatine, and probably lots of positives.
Sure.
Particularly for speed, power kinds of activities.
Also, just in a more overreaching approach would be any of the supplements that we're taking. If we can find that supplement in a BSCG approved product, certified drug free, and it has that
I wouldn't buy anything. I would if I were subject to testing or were at all concerned about contamination, I wouldn't consume anything that didn't have that certification.
Yeah. And even if you're not a competitor, what about if you just want to, you're concerned about the quality and the safety and the validity of that product, that it is what it says it is.
Yep.
Yeah. I know they did some study on protein not too long ago about some of the the protein companies, and they were looking at how many grams of protein were really in the dosage volume that the label said. And what they found was that very few of the protein companies actually were producing the amount of protein that they were saying that they were on their label.
I'm only aware of one protein company that has this kind of certification, which does not mean there aren't others,
right?
But I'm only aware of one.
Who would that protein company be?
Stronger, Healthier, Faster.
Okay, yeah.
The guys in Maine.
Yeah, FSH. Great guys,
Yep.
Great quality product. I used to take a lot of their products when I owned my CrossFit gyms. We were a vendor for them. So good, very good products. What about things like beta-alanine and some of the other muscle performance?
There are two other molecules out there, neither of which are in our product, but they're both, the data suggest they matter. One of them is branched chain amino acids.
Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah.
You got me, man. I was getting ready to ask you about that.
I'm thinking about it. It's got two value propositions. First and foremost, for anybody that's in a strength activity, since leucine is a branched chain amino acid, and the gene that has to get turned on to make muscle protein, after it's turned on, it won't start making protein unless it detects leucine.
Right.
So on the way home from the gym, I'm consuming a protein bar to make sure I have enough leucine.
Sure. Well, I mean, we know that I deal with that a lot with training with strength clients and training clients that are vegans. And I tell them all the time, if you're going to be a vegan, that's great, but you just need to understand to support muscle protein synthesis, because we're providing significant stress to your muscular system, you're going to have to supplement with leucine, because you're not going to get that in any volume content whatsoever from plant-based protein.
Agreed.
And so, I tell them, hey, you're just going to have to do this, or you're not going to keep up with programming. You're not going to stay in a linear progression or advance to more higher level programming and strength training.
That's the leucine part. But
Correct.
The other, all three of them together, also in adequate quantities, lead to the production of an intermediate in the citric acid cycle that, if that intermediate increases in concentration, allows you to acutely increase your capacity for anything that even remotely looks like an endurance activity.
Sure.
So branched chain amino acids in general, any real athlete, particularly at the master's level, you've got to have enough of them.
Now, would you recommend their dosaging and ratio in the naturally occurring
No, absolutely
ratio,
not.
2:1, or
Nope.
what would you recommend?
Nope. If we ever get around to making our own stuff, it's going to be in a 4:1 ratio, with 4 being leucine.
Okay, that's exactly what I thought. So that's excellent. Good. That's the kind of stuff that we want to provide our listeners and give them this kind of information from quality sources, people that are science-based individuals like you.
Now, there's one other thing I want to mention, and that's Hmb, hydroxymethyl butyrate, which is in a lot of products and is clearly dead center in the middle of almost any metabolic pathway that touches muscle metabolism and muscle growth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clearly a positive effector of these pathway fluxes. The problem to me is that it's the breakdown product of leucine.
Right. Yep.
So if you already have enough leucine, I'm still unconvinced that any extra hydroxymethyl butyrate matters.
Right. And I've read the same thing in the literature, that if you've got the right quantity and upper level volume of leucine, then you don't need to supplement with Hmb.
You're right. Then you get an A in my biochemistry class.
what I like about all this stuff, and you and I could probably sit and talk for hours and geek out on this stuff, but what I like about this stuff is, and what I hope that we can do, Loren, if you could do this for us, I would love to get, if you could email me a basic listing of all the things that we've talked about today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that way we can get that out to the listener audience, and it'll be in the show notes of this podcast, so that listeners can just go straight down to the show notes on iTunes or their chosen podcast producer, and they can get that information and they can see exactly what we've recommended in this podcast.
I will. I'm going to put one other thing in here. You said something in one of the things you sent me about protein intake.
Sure. Yeah.
And you suggested 1.5 to 1.75 grams per pound body mass. I think that's low.
Yeah. Wow. Now let's talk about that just a little bit before, because this could be a whole podcast in itself. Let's first let our listener audience know this. Hey, guys out there, if you're over the age of 40 and you're strength training, one of the things you need to understand, whether you're male or female, is that you don't, in general, synthesize muscle protein cell structure as well as a younger individual does. Basically, if you're eating protein in your diet, which you should be, obviously, and you're getting your adequate protein, what you have to understand is that you're not also able to convert as much of that protein into muscle protein synthesis as a younger person is. So with that being the case, a lot of people, as they get older, they lose appetite. They start eating less and less and less and less, and they need to be doing just the opposite. They need to be eating more protein, and then they need to be lifting, and they need to be in an exercise program that's promoting strength training, and then all the other 10 general physical skills like we've talked about before. And so you're recommending what then? What kind of ratio are you?
I would say that past age 50, a minimum of 2 grams per pound body mass a day.
Wow. That is a lot of freaking protein.
It is a lot of freaking protein. So let's consider what that actually means. Let's assume for the moment that you're not a moron and that it's not all
that
bone
is a
and
hard
ribeye.
assumption with me.
Okay. Let's imagine that the protein is relatively low fat. It's chicken, it's fish, it's whey protein, it's that kind of stuff.
Sure, good lean protein, yeah.
Yeah, so if you consume enough, you have enough. If you don't consume enough, you don't have enough.
Right.
If you consume more than enough, your body has all kinds of ways to deaminate the amino acids, dump the amino groups as in your urine, and keep the carbon skeleton, and everything's fine.
Right.
There's no negative to taking too much protein.
Right. Yeah, and that's an important point, because a lot of people are told just the otherwise. It's hard on your liver, it's hard on your kidneys. It's an organic molecule. It's a naturally occurring molecule. You're going to, you're basically just going to process what you need and use what you need with a small amount of stores.
Okay, let's hit those organs here. Hard on your kidneys. It's only hard on your kidneys if you're not consuming enough fluids. So the urine gets very concentrated. If it's got a bunch of urea in it, then it's got a chance of crystallizing. But if you hydrate enough, you just pee it out.
Yeah, sure.
And your liver, for crying out loud, that's only a problem if the protein you're consuming is contaminated with something that needs to be detoxified.
Right.
If not, your liver's not involved.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's basically just your kidneys that you're concerned with. And like you said, if you're hydrating well enough, then there's no concern.
And if you're an athlete and you're not hydrating, then you got bigger problems than this podcast.
Yeah. And so, yeah, exactly. And so would that be a male consumption? Would you recommend the same for females? Oh, a human consumption.
Yeah.
So you'd recommend about the same.
If you get to be that age and you're training hard, consume protein.
What if you're just a normal individual and you're not training hard?
Oh, that's a different story. Then I would say that the numbers probably are, past age 40, better than a gram per pound, but
Sure.
you probably don't need much more than that.
Okay. So you could say, based on their training program, whether they're just recreationally exercising, they really don't have a program, but they're doing something, or someone that's actually training, whether it be for a competitive event or a recreational event, or they're just training to be stronger and more fit and more healthier, it's going to be somewhere between 1 and 2.0. And if you're going to err on one side, make sure you hydrate well and err to the high side. There you have it. Right?
There's no negative to the high side.
Yeah. So there you have it. So, man, I love this information. And one of the things that our listener audience needs to know about you, Loren, is you're a pretty legit lifter. I mean, in the Olympic lifting world,
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, you've been to the world, right? You've been to
I'm world championship qualifier. And I turned 66 on Saturday. I weigh 90 kilos. I can back squat twice my body weight. I front squat about 180% of my body weight.
Awesome.
I'm okay.
Yeah, legit. How many 66-year-old guys can do that? I can maybe
not many that I know.
Probably not too many of your peers. When you go back to your high school reunion.
I actually sort of was a little embarrassed the last time I went, because they went, "How old are you?"
Whose body did you come back in?
They created this special award for most preserved or something like that.
They probably were thinking to themselves, "Hey, so whose body did you actually snatch?" And well, I actually do the snatch. No, but I mean, it's the Olympic lifting joke, but no, I mean, they probably were looking at you and saying, "Man, this is amazing." And my mother and father-in-law are exactly the same. They're I'm not going to say their age, but they're much older than you, and many of their classmates are no longer here. And when they go back to their high school reunion, which they just did lately, it's totally that they don't even feel like they're with their peers anymore, because they're so healthy. They live a very active lifestyle. He still rides horses several days a week. He flies helicopters for a living. She's very active. She exercises, and they got great genes too. And they take care of themselves.
They're physically active.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And they don't let their age stand in the way of wanting to do something, which is part of this whole mentality that we want to create through 40 Fit. And that is, who cares if you're 60? If you want to go out and do something, be smart and prepare for it and train for things correctly and do the things you want to do. And I love this information about supplements, vitamins, and minerals. I think obviously this is a huge, huge topic. But I can say this, Loren, we are going to make you our content expert whenever we have questions on this subject matter, because I can't think of anyone, number one, smarter in this area. Number two, someone who actually owns a company that provides a very good quality product in Pangea Biomedical. And by the way, guys, you can go to pangeabiomedical.com. That's PANGEA biomedical.com. You can find out all about Loren because he's head of their science team. He's the founder of the company. And then you can find out about the product origins that they have. And then you can also look at some of the testimonials on the Team Pangea tab that tells you a little bit about the athletes and the individuals that are using this product. We will provide our listening audience with a list of all the things that Dr. Bertocci, that Dr. Bertocci has recommended for us. God, that's hard to say for a Southerner,
all right.
But
I know I lived in Dallas for 15 years. I know.
Yeah, you're family, man. And exactly. And so we'll definitely provide a list of these things. And but like you said, here's the key. You need to understand that we all start with a whole foods diet first, good quality nutrition. But even with that, supplementing can give you that little bit of extra edge and also help with your quality of life. Loren, do you have anything else you'd like to add this evening?
Yeah. And I guess I would like to tell the audience that the reason I'm here on this podcast is because of things that you wrote and published that I read 5, 6 or so years ago.
Sure.
And I read those things and I went, he gets it. This is finally somebody with this kind of background that is paying attention to people that are older, because we're not the same.
Right. No,
and I hope all of the listeners realize what a resource you are based on what you know.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that we're all in this for the same boat. Loren's created a company that that obviously specializes in the supplementation industry for masters. I mean, his product is a master's. I mean, anyone could take it, but it's a master's marketed and master's only product.
I would argue that if you're 30, you don't need it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, it's a good point. Good point. And so I think that, and that's what 40 Fit's all about. It's about providing a forum for our masters aged individuals to go to where they can find out the science about information. They can find out also, we can bring on people that are not only just in the science profession or science field in all these different areas, but also people with significant experience themselves as athletes or as people who train and live a very active lifestyle. So that's our goal here. Guys, Loren, I appreciate you being on the podcast tonight. It's been awesome. We will definitely have you on in future podcasts as we dial deeper into the area of supplements, nutrition, and also as we talk about metabolic processes within muscles and muscle recovery. We'll definitely have Dr. Bertocci back on. And if you would like to go to and find out more information about 40 Fit, you can go to 40fit.com. You can also go to @40fitradio on Instagram. And then you can also go to our Facebook community group, which is 40 Fit Masters Community Group. And as always, guys, we're just trying to make you healthy, and we will see you on the next 40 Fit Radio podcast.